Krystal, we're so excited to be joined by our guest this morning. Tell us a little bit about JD Belcher. We're very excited to be joined by JD. Krystal, tell us a little bit about JD. I know you guys go a long way back.
Yeah, this is an old friend of mine. Nice to see you, JD. He's a former coal miner turned documentarian, now runs JJN Multimedia Marketing Agency in Southern West Virginia. And for more than 3 years, he's been working on a separate podcast project, digging into the Upper Big Branch mine disaster. That, for you guys that may not recall, is an explosion that occurred on April 5th in 2010, killed 29 coal miners. And obviously that tragedy continuing to reverberate throughout the West Virginia and Southern West Virginia in particular community. It's great to see you, JD.
Thanks for having me, Krystal. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. So before we get into you telling us why you wanted to tell this story, you put together an incredible trailer so that people can get a sense of what this podcast is all about. Let's take a look at that.
New findings and charges in the investigation of the Upper Big Branch mine disaster in West Virginia. 29 men were killed on April 5th, 2010, after an explosion at the mine then owned by Massey Energy.
Prior to the explosion, he loved being a coal miner, and he was a good boss. He would never ask you to do something that he wouldn't do.
That coal dust that you mentioned, there was so much of it, massive explosion that coursed through the mine because of the presence of all that coal dust.
So we know that the gas came quickly. We know it was natural gas.
That's his theory. The investigations all found otherwise.
The only thing that they was worried about was making sure the longwall was going to run the way it was supposed to, because that's your moneymaker.
So JD, what part of this story did you feel like still needed to be told?
Sure. So, there's been several attempts to do this that were great attempts. This isn't to slight those, but I felt like there needed to be a comprehensive effort to tell the story of Upper Big Branch, which first and foremost, holding the 29 miners and their families in the forefront of respect and dignity, and explaining who they were and the emotion of this tragedy and just what it did to these communities, but also going into the facts of the investigation and trying to answer, basically, where is coal mining today and are we being as safe as we possibly can? And I feel, confident that we lay out the facts enough in an unbiased way to where, the listener can make their own decision about the tragedy. And it's just overall devastating. So a warning there. It's not for the faint of heart, and it is absolutely devastating what these families have went through.
And JD, if people were listening to the trailer, they may not have caught the image of Joe Manchin. If you were watching it, you certainly saw Joe Manchin in the trailer. I just wanted to ask about the sort of politics of all of this in the last 14 years. Obviously, a lot of some of the same characters are involved. West Virginia politics are a very interesting thing, as many people know. So what can you tell us about whether people who are responsible for this politically in terms of the business community have been held responsible, and to what extent are people that may share some culpability are still major figures in West Virginia politics?
Sure, and obviously politics was heavily involved. Senator Manchin, then Governor Manchin at the time, was there for the whole week with the families, waiting for updates, giving updates to the public. So, I think overall the feeling is just of, there's closure is hard to find. And people across the board just don't feel that accountability has really been taken on, any sides involved. Obviously the investigation found that the company was to blame on certain lack of safety standards that they were holding at their mine. And we go through all of this. There were prison sentences given out. And, there was a $209 million judgment agreed with Alpha Natural Resources, who purchased Massey Energy to do certain things like research and restitution, obviously, and fines. There's a $10.8 million fine given out. But overall, people are still pointing fingers and saying, oh, it was this side, or, oh, it was that side. It was MSHA's fault. It was Massey's fault. And, overall, I think we just need to come together and analyze where the coal industry is today and figure out, are we getting complacent? Because since then, 48 coal miners died in 2010. Since then, from 2011 on, over 150 coal miners have died on the job. So, I just don't believe that any coal miner needs to go to work worried if they're going to come home. I think we can do a better job across the board on figuring out just what we can do to make things better.
And what do you think that should be done that would make things better, that would keep coal miners safe on the job?
Oh, yeah. Well, there's one thing I know we can change right now, and it is requiring organic respirators for mine rescue teams when they enter a mine. So I'll touch on this lightly, but we go over it in the podcast. The lead investigator for the state, Bill Tucker, does an extensive interview with me. We talked for over 2 hours. And on the podcast, we discuss his breathing issues, and he can barely walk across the yard without sitting down to take a breath. And that was found to be the blame of his role in the investigation. So there's something called barefaced exploration, which basically means after an explosion, a mine rescue team's goal is to save lives. They have an apparatus on their back that it's called going under air, that gives them 4 hours of oxygen. Well, up until a certain level, when their oxygen and carbon monoxide readings get to a certain level, they go barefaced, which basically means they go in the mine with nothing on their face until a certain extent to go under air and save that oxygen. So he actually had a panel of doctors find that his issue was caused directly because of UBB in his role, and he filed for workers' comp. Well, the state contested his workers' comp. They sent him to a panel of their doctors. Their doctors concurred with his doctors that it was directly as a result to his role in UBB in the investigation. So it's on record that this was, they done bronchoscopies, lung testing on him, and said without a doubt, this is what happened. And he was thankfully awarded his workers' comp. And, they're still on the books today. You can look it up. It's called barefaced exploration. I think that needs to be eliminated, and that's something we can cheaply do now that can preserve quality of life. So that's number one. But there's, other things like, is the pattern of violation system being enforced? Which, those who don't know, basically that's MSHA's ability to go in a mine that has so many serious violations. They can go in this mine and shut it down. Well, before UBB, in 32 years, the POV system was enacted once.
Wow.
And it was found to have a computer glitch in their system from 2007 on. And now, granted, I want to make sure people know that wouldn't have affected UBB. They could have been placed on a pattern of violation system in the past, but they would not have been on a pattern of violation system when this occurred. But I think that's something we need to look at and make sure is running properly.
No doubt about it.
Yeah, my last question, JD, is just what it was like to go and talk to some of these families, and as they've been sort of reflecting on what happened. What can you tell us just about where they are, what's maybe happened to them in the decade plus since? What was that like to re-engage on this really difficult moment in their lives?
Sure. It's, devastating is the word. They're still mourning the loss every single day. And they're hurting, and their loved ones are not here. They got a phone call that just, this explosion happened, and they never talked to them again. So it was just a heavy, heavy presence. I read the eulogies of all 29 on the podcast, and just seeing their faces is just a constant, heavy presence, and also a responsibility to get this right. Them and their families did nothing wrong whatsoever. And I just felt the need to explain what a coal miner is. You hear on a national narrative what a typical West Virginian is, and I always call BS, usually. Sometimes we get it right, but, I felt that this story needed to be told by a West Virginian, and I was a surface coal miner for 9 years of my life, so I know what the culture is, and I know what kind of people coal miners are, and I wanted to be sure to respect that with the story.
Yeah, well, you absolutely did that, and it's an important story not only for West Virginia and for uplifting the culture and the people who suffered losses there, but also for understanding this is a story about greed and a failure of politicians and a lack of accountability, and in that way, it is an incredibly universal story. JD, just tell people the name of the podcast, where they can find it, and where they can follow your work.
Sure, UBB, A Coal Miner Story. And we've been getting a lot of traction on the website for a lot of people who aren't podcast savvy. There's a lot of elderly that was wanting to listen. You can send them to upperbigbranch.com. You can listen to every episode there. We also have a Facebook community going. So if you want to get involved in the conversation, we have debates on there, and we keep it civil, and we're just trying to figure out where we're at in the coal industry. And anywhere else that you get your podcast, it's pretty much available. I think there's nearly 20 platforms it's on. And I want to make sure, note too, this is a nonprofit, educational purposes only endeavor. I'm not making $1 on this for reimbursement or profit or anything. So I just want people to learn about this and us figure this out together.
Yeah. Guys, please check out the podcast. JD, incredible work. Congratulations. I know this has been a long-term project and labor of love for you. So thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. And thank you guys so much for watching out there. I will be back again, if you're not sick of me, with soccer tomorrow. Emily, always fun to host with you. And I will see you guys tomorrow.
Sounds good. That does it for us on today's Counterpoints. We'll be back next week with more Counterpoints, obviously. Krystal will be back tomorrow. You can find the link to JD's podcast in the description of this video. Of course, make sure to check that out. We'll see you back here next week. Hey, if you liked that video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to Breaking Points.
If you want to see the rest of Counterpoints, go to breakingpoints.com to become a premium member and get the full uncut show every morning in your inbox and on Spotify.
Help us build independent news and get the full show every morning at breakingpoints.com.